this is a really important session, and it's probably a good indicator of how far the industry's come. You'll recall that the deer industry was the earliest adopter of on-farm QA, and that was a farmer-led strategy. And then that dissipated under the weight of a whole lot of individual things, and they come under the category of what we would call doing the right thing. And that encompasses animal welfare, farm environment practice, people, all of those sort of soft stuff that isn't in the hard production and money area. But we know that the domino effect is huge, and we heard about some of that. You know, if you looked at the marketing stories this morning, you can see how integrated the whole concept of doing the right thing is. And so the industry has invested some reserve money in having the resource of Lindsay on board with us. And Lindsay's been in this role for, I think, 2 years, Lindsay. That's the degree to of importance that we place it. So what you're going to see now is some good news stories, and we need to think about how this integrates into the story of the industry. And then we've got an outside speaker from another initiative that might be able to integrate into the deer industry, because we don't want to all be repeating the same things. So I'm going to hand over to Lindsay to run us through some really good stuff.
Thanks very much, Andy. And I say this with utmost humility and honesty, that this is a real privilege to be here presenting these awards. And I do have to apologise because Janet Gregory, the principal judge, is actually moving houses at the moment, so she's unable to attend. And George Williams, who is the previous Elworthy winner from 2 years ago, is also unavailable. So you're stuck with a DINS bureaucrat for this one. Apologies for that. But having said that, you know, we have 5 entrants this year. Janet, who's been judging these awards for a number of years, said that she's just amazed every time, each year, how much the standard gets raised across the board. And I think, you know, when you sort of see some snapshots of the farms, the entrants, hopefully you'll agree that all of the entrants this year, the standard of environmental awareness and what they were doing on farm is a real credit both to them and to the industry. We've got a quick 8-minute video introducing the farmers and their farms. So we'll run through that, and then we'll do a little bit of a slideshow of what some of the key points that we identified on the farms, and then I'll run through the award winners. So if we could roll the video, please.
G'day, I'm George Williams. I'm from
Thanks. Just a quick note that last shot of from Steve's farm, that was his garden. That wasn't a paddock. He's got a bit of gardening to do. So here's just a bit of a slideshow of some of the observations that we had for all the contestants, all the entrants. So first up is Claire and Simon. So again, I'd just like to mention that all of the 5 entrants that we had this year, I would have no problems of showing any regional council these properties and showing them what farmers are doing, in the absence of any regulation, or maybe with the idea of regulation coming over the top. But essentially, what they've taken on, done as part of their own business and part of their own set of values. And I think, I would struggle to see any regional council not be impressed by the efforts that all entrants have done on their farms. So what we found with Claire and Simon was that they have a very proactive relationship with the processor and the promotion of their story behind the product. So Claire and Simon supply Silver Fern Farms. They've been on a recent issue of Mind Food, and they've hosted a number of overseas guests. I think Claire started farming, I think, first deer were in the early 80s. And then later on in 1996, they moved onto a larger property. So from day one, I think Claire sort of had indicated that she was going to tackle things look at things from an environmental perspective, and her vision and what she saw as priorities were quite clear in her approach to management. There's an excellent program for planning for shade and shelter, and some fantastic examples of stream protection, riparian planting, and the use of sediment traps to improve water quality. The next farm is the Lyndon and Millie Matthews. So this is a picture of a wetland area that the Matthews have put in. It was recognised by Environment Canterbury, won an Environment Canterbury Water Quality Award. The other thing to note is that this particular property came out from 3 years of successive droughts. If that's not a demanding environment, then I would struggle to think what is. And then on top of that, there's been the earthquakes as well. So, the fact that they're still sort of farming well is real credit to how they've managed to rise to those challenges. There's a good succession plan in mind. Eldon, their eldest, is quite heavily involved in the environmental planning aspects of that. So I think there's a good synergy there between the present ownership and potential future ownership. And again, in a drought hit landscape, the use of their pasture management is with the species that they use to fit those soils is very apparent. This year we had a very interesting contestant in the form of David and Hilary Ward. They're intensive farmers on the plains. It's quite unusual to see a deer farm on the plains these days, but this one in particular, it's predominantly what I'd call a cropping farm with some finishing thrown in on the top of it. And I think what sort of really impressed us was that when we're getting into these environmental policy conversations and things, quite often the talk around intensive farming is that this is the one which is a major cause of concern for water quality. What we found with the wards was that they intensively monitor everything that they do. Soils, nutrient tests, pasture, animal health. So what we've found is that they actually run a very efficient operation which actually has quite a low environmental input. And that runs right throughout the farm. So it's not just the monitoring, but their planning is pretty impressive too. And I think I guess when you think about cropping farms, That's probably a key strength that they bring to any farming operation. The other sort of comment, we saw a little still there in the video of the soil there. I've seen a fair bit of soil in my time, and I have to say that's some of the best soil that I've seen. So just take my word for it. But yeah. And I think the other thing that we've seen with all the entrants actually is that they're heavily involved in their community. They're also heavily involved in deer industry initiatives such as the Advance Party. So from one challenging environment to another. Now we move to Lake Tekapo and Hamish and Julia Mackenzie. So again, what we found with this farm was that this was a real partnership. There's a real complementarity between Hamish and Julia. Julia in particular is very proactive. So for those of you who aren't aware, there's this thing called the Mackenzie District Council, and they've had a recent plan change, which for those of you who are aware, is it's actually quite restrictive and perhaps puts some of the regional plans to shame in terms of their restrictiveness. Julie's been very proactive in encouraging involvement into this planning, marshalling up all the local farming community, and also sort of, I suppose, putting their heads above the parapet and speaking to a range of groups. But it is a challenging environment. I think it's probably got one of the shortest growing seasons in the country. So they have to farm within that. They also have to farm with this added addition of scrutiny from both the public and through regulation. So the fact that they're able to do so, and in our opinion have a low environmental footprint, is pretty inspiring. And then finally, our last farm that we visited, and I have to say probably the worst weather that we encountered as well. So was yeah. So actually, what you might have seen in those videos is the rain coming through. There's not a lot of stills there, and this was taken from Janet's cell phone camera, because every time she tried to take a picture with a proper camera or a video camera as a still, the rain just kept on coming into the lens, so she couldn't get a clear shot. This again, if we're talking about challenging environments, this has got some pretty major challenges too. Topography, soils, highly erodible, very high rainfall. So some real limitations for what you can and can't do with your animals. And so, we were impressed with the understanding that Chabot had with the animal requirements, what they could and couldn't do. This is a farm that has started from scratch from 3 years. So from 3 years with no deer to where it is today, a phenomenal amount of thinking and planning and development over those 3 years. Quite eye-watering really when you sort of think about the amount of fencing that's been put in. Again, like many of the other contestants, there's a recognition of succession, and also that farming these days is not just about growing meat or fibre or velvet or whatever. There are other business opportunities that the farm needs to explore. The advent of tourism and how that might relate to farming operations. And also quite notable is that this area has quite a lot of native vegetation in it, and there's been a very a comprehensive understanding of what needs to be protected and how that might be enhanced over time. So those are the those are the sort of the things we noted about all the entrants. The minister has already announced the major award winners. So, but we do have a number of other awards which I'll read out now. The first one being is the Duncan and Company Award. This is for vision and innovation whilst mastering a demanding environment. The recipient of this award demonstrates forward thinking and adopts sustainable farming practices whilst having to operate their business within a demanding environment. So the winner of this award is Lyndon and Millie Matthews and family. So again, with 3 years of drought, we think that's a pretty demanding environment. And again, the major wetland retirement and restoration project which they've undertaken, not only did it win an award from Environment Canterbury, it's actually encouraged their neighbour to take similar action. The next award is the Gallagher Technology and Innovation Award, and this is for excellent utilisation of farming technologies to improve on-farm productivity and manage resources. The recipient of this award has utilised farming technologies and knowledge to progress their business, improve on-farm productivity and manage resources. And the winner of this award is David and Hilary Ward. So again, I think what I mentioned before is that as an intensive land use, the amount of monitoring and care and attention to what goes in, what comes off, and the management of the soil resource is impressive. The other feature that we noticed is that the wards are very open to new ideas. They also provide a teaching resource to the local and international university students. So they well accept that their farm is open to scrutiny and input. The next award is the First Light Foods Limited Award, and this is for total commitment to farming sustainability with a strong customer focus. The recipient demonstrates a passion for the land and strong environmental stewardship. They actively work towards ensuring the land is left for the next generation in a better state than when they started. It is clear from their business decisions that they have the end customer in mind. And the award goes to Claire Parks and Simon Vincent. So again, I think I mentioned that right from the very start, there's been a clear vision of what environmental management looks like and where it's heading. And there's a very strong linkage with international consumers through the Silver Fern Farms Venison Global Retail Program. The next award is the DFA Next Generation Award, and this is for outstanding performance across environmental, financial and social aspects of the business. The recipient of this award has demonstrated outstanding performance across environmental, financial, social aspects of their business. Their passion for farming deer and doing it well showcases the opportunities that lie within the New Zealand deer industry. And the award winners are Hamish and Julia Mackenzie. So again, this is a farm that's under intense scrutiny, both through social scrutiny and through regulation. And it's an extremely challenging environment with its short growing season. But in spite of all of this, it's an incredibly well-run farm with a very low low footprint. Tourism, as we've seen, is seen as an integral part of the process. And again, I think this leadership factor, common with all the entrants, but very, very strong with Hamish and Julia. So this is a resource that I think is good for the community, and also good for us as for the deer industry. The last award is the Landcare Trust Award, and that's for excellence in sustainable deer farming through action on the ground. The recipient of this award has demonstrated a strong level of leadership through identification of risk areas on their property, implementation of mitigation tools, and adoption of farming systems to ensure long-term sustainability. The winner of this award is Shabor, Steve and Chris Borland and Bob Sharp. So I think, if there was ever an Environment 101 quiz, there might be a question like this. Take a steep, erodible farm with no deer fencing, high rainfall, lots of waterways, and many patches of native bush. Add deer. Make a profit and have a low environmental footprint. Discuss. And I think maybe one of the model answers might be the solution is lots of hard work, prioritise areas for focus, seek council assistance, engage the community, do a job properly, but seek low cost options where possible, and have a plan. And all of that is something which is encapsulated in the work that Steve and Chris have done on their farm. So the Minister has already announced the Premier Award, the Allworthy Environmental Award, which went to Shibor Limited. But I'd like to take the opportunity, again, to thank all of the entrants. I think you're all a credit to the industry and yourselves, obviously. If this is a standard if the standard is being raised each year, I think that the industry is in very good heart. And again, something that all the entrants sort of agreed with was that as an industry, we need to be out there front-footing this, telling our story more. And I think in these 5 entrants, we've got some fantastic case studies to tell the rest of New Zealand what deer farming can do and is doing. So let's please have another round of thanks for the award winners and the entrants.
Thanks, Lindsay. You're doing a really good job. And if you go back to the whole heart of the Passion to Profit program, it's about being farmer-led. And those 5 entrants really do show farmer-led. And just one little stat that might be interesting, I know David and Hilary Ward quite well, they're a near neighbour. When they started their program with direct drilling, intensive cropping, with lamb and deer finishing about 12 years ago, the soil organic matter on their farm was about 4.5%. So with that program, after 15 years, it's between 9 and 10% now. So if that isn't building the soil and building your natural resource while actually increasing productivity and profitability, I don't know what is. And so and we're getting the same sort of results around New Zealand, and we don't promote them well enough. And this is about being farmer-led and taking charge. And I'd just like really here to acknowledge the fact that the DFA, you know, the leadership group of the DFA and Dave in particular is passionate about it, are really taking the charge here. It doesn't matter what DIN say if the farmer groups don't want to do this stuff. And so we can use it to leverage what we do in a positive manner, but we have to be seen to be doing it right first. So in light of that, what I'd like to do, we've got 2 speakers now, and I'd like to introduce Karina Jordan from Beef and Lamb. It's very important that we don't try and be lone rangers here, because it's no different to the All Blacks scrum. You have 8 All Blacks, but if they don't push together, you make no progress. And the reality is that 80% of deer farmers also farm sheep or beef. And so we need to be hand in glove with the other industry organisations to make sure that we all do the right thing together. So Karina's got a background as a freshwater ecologist, and also she's a trained geneticist. And so she's part of the next generation of talent, young talent coming through in the agricultural sector. We welcome you along to give us some thoughts, Karina.
So apparently I've got 1 minute for my talk. Is that about right?
No,
Shall I just cut to the chase? Oh, I need one of these. So I've separated my talk into 2 parts essentially. So you'll have to bear with me. The first part, I sort of essentially set out a bit of a problem statement. I talk about our social license to operate and increasing concern of our society around the impacts of agriculture on our freshwater resources, which is driving regulation. And then for the second part of my talk, I actually give you a bit of a solution. I talk about farm environment planning as a way to tell your story in a transparent and vibrant manner, and which underpins sustainability of our dry stock sector. So the concept of sustainable management has been around for a while. It was put forward by the World Commission for the Environment and Development in 1987, and it underpins national policy on sustainable resource management and also underpins our own Resource Management Act. However, in the last decade, we've seen shifts, massive shifts in societal understanding of what they consider to be sustainability, increasing environmental regulation of farming, and changes to consumer attitudes around food and its traceability and its authenticity. In New Zealand, public concerns around the impacts of agriculture on its freshwater, and the risk to human health has become mainstream. So it's not just the domain of the extreme left anymore. We've got general public concerns around agriculture and its impacts on freshwater. And these concerns have been highlighted and heightened through emotional stories around Canterbury, recent incidences, that was last year around Havelock, and 5,000 cases of Campi that arose from that incident, and more recently around the Radio New Zealand's Waterfall series, which started off by having a look at the Rangitikei farmers and their hill country cropping incidences. I've been doing this work for quite a while. I've been in this area for the last 10 years, and I've been alarmed really at, over the last 7 months, the increasing incidence and veracity, I suppose, of the media around freshwater and agricultural land uses. Over the last 6 months, we've also seen 2 keystone reports produced, one by the Ministry for the Environment, hand in hand with Stats New Zealand, which reviews our freshwater 2017, and the other by the Minister's Chief Science, which we call the Gluckman Report, which has also illustrated issues around agricultural land use and freshwater in New Zealand. And I know that a lot of these frontline stories have really been focused around intensive agriculture, but now, more than ever, they're also starting to focus on the dry stock sector. So we're seeing increasing pressure on our beef farming, and also this will be cause increasing pressure on deer farming as well. So why the concern? New Zealand's reliance on primary agriculture has unique implications for freshwater resources in New Zealand. We're seeing changes in hydrology, changes in geomorphology, increasing enrichment of our rivers, that's from nitrogen and phosphorus, sedimentation impacts on rivers, which also impact on estuaries, and increasing concerns around pathogens of waterborne and their impact on human health. So just a quick recap, and I hope that you all know this. And this sort of underpins also where we take our farm environment plans. So those main contaminant discharge pathways that we're worried about are over the land. So this is in relation to sediment and phosphorus and pathogens. And they lend themselves really well to being managed through critical source management. Also, what we've got concerns is those things that are a little bit harder to manage. The contaminants that go through from our land, through the soil profile, into groundwater, and then recharge into surface water. Nitrogen's a key one here, and it's becoming increasingly hard to manage. When policymakers are thinking about these 2 pathways for agricultural land use to impact on water quality, then that's where they focus their regulation. Also, what we've got in New Zealand is an issue with pathogens that are waterborne. We've got some of the highest rates of Campylobacter in the developed world. We're seeing around 17,000 cases of gastroenteritis per year, and about 34,000 cases of waterborne illness per year. We're seeing these sort of concerns borne out by the government, who are starting to think about swimmability standards and changes to national regulation to address these public concerns around agriculture and its impacts on fresh water. I'm going to hopefully finish this part pretty quick. I'm just going through it. So we've had the Resource Management Act in place for a while. It came into effect in 1991. However, off the back of rising public concerns of agriculture and water quality, we've also seen the government put forward the National Policy Statement in 2014. And this is what has underpinned a shift in regulatory frameworks that have been put forward by regional councils. You'll know about the Horizons 1 plan. We've had the Hawke's Bay Tukitoki plan go through. We're seeing increasing regulation in Canterbury. We're seeing the Waikato Regional Council put forward their Plan Change 1, and I'd hope that you all know a little bit about that, which is raising significant concerns within the dry stock sector up in the Waikato region. So it's really important that farmers understand these risks, especially in relation to their social licence to operate, which underpins regulatory frameworks, and that they turn these risks into opportunities. It's going to be increasingly important in the future for our sectors to be able to tell our story with honesty, transparency, and authenticity. It's important that as individuals and as communities that we stand up, we speak up, and we show leadership in relation to looking for pragmatic solutions to these issues, which retain our resilience and our vibrancy of our businesses to operate into the future and to adapt to changes in climate and market. Part of showing leadership and starting to address some of these issues is being able to take initiatives which are voluntary and show real improvements in relation to the environment and the sustainability and the profitability of our businesses. As part of that, it's really important that we develop sound data to underpin our story. These are things like nutrient budgets, these are things like the amount of money that we spend on environmental mitigation, and uptake of farm environment plans, such as the Beef and Lambs Land Environment Plan, or around regional councils, you also have voluntary mechanisms like Horizon Sustainable Land Use Initiative. With this initiative alone, farmers within the Horizons region have spent over $14 million addressing environmental impacts while maintaining profitable and resilient businesses. And that's a really, really powerful story to be able to tell to our public. So what are farm environment plans? They're essentially a tool which enables farmers to understand the natural resources, that's the soil, water, and land on their farm. They provide a risk matrix for activities and enable farmers to better manage these in the long term. Simply put, the farm environment plan, or the process, takes the farmer through steps to understand their land and their water resources, and to put in place management approaches which maximise the productive potential of their land while addressing critical source areas and sustainably managing their freshwater and their soils for the future. A well-prepared farm environment plan captures stewardship and sustainability as a record, showing that measurable actions are being taken to address environmental concerns and to demonstrate good practice. These plans and the process provide the cornerstone to voluntary sustainable management of land and water resources through educating and empowering farmers to better understand their natural resources, to learn from their peers and the professionals that are part of the farm environment planning process, and to ultimately take ownership of the problems and also their solutions and their own destiny, rather than waiting for regulation to hit, which is blunt. Farm environment plans enable you to understand and identify where resources are not being fully utilised and production opportunities are being lost, provides a structured approach to new development on farm by managing areas to their capability, that's the capability of their soils, and within the limits of water. They should be integrated into your farm business planning. Essentially, they enable you to identify improvements in farming practices that will enhance production, future-proof your business, and foster access to environmentally discerning markets in the future. Underpinning the farm environment plan is an understanding of your land management units and your soils. So most properties are a mosaic of soils, and you know that probably better than me, and land types, each with different capabilities and limitations. These limitations affect productivity, the number and complexity of corrective practices that can be put in place on those soils, the environmental risks in relation to those soils, and the intensity and manner of your land use. Limitations include susceptibility to erosion, slope, depth of soil, soil structure, and nutrient supply and climate. If you understand and farm to your soils, you can maximise the productive benefit of those soils, diversify your land use while addressing environmental concerns. So experience has shown that the classification of land according to its capability for long-term production, based on its physical limitations and site-specific management needs, provides the most reliable basis on which to promote sustainable land management. It's something also that is a really easy story to tell the general public. It's something that they will inherently understand, believe in, and when you adopt that approach, you end up with these beautiful farms which are a mosaic of land use, which retire critical source areas and which increase production and profitability on that better class of land. The outstanding feature of dry stock sector in particular, in comparison with other agricultural sectors, is the high degree of spatial and temporal variability of our landscapes and our farming systems. So that means that studies have consistently shown that far from being characterised by diffuse discharges, those are nitrogen discharges and things like that, our farming operations are characterised by contaminant losses which occur on small areas of the farm during short periods such as rainfall, which means that they lend themselves really well to being addressed through critical source management. So these critical source areas are areas where sediment, phosphorus, nitrogen, pathogens can be discharged from the farming activity. They aggregate in certain areas and then from there enter water bodies. About 80% of phosphorus and sediment can be managed on the farm by addressing 20% of the farming area. The best outcomes in relation to the environment and in relation to the profitability and resilience of farming business arise when mitigation is adapted, which one is chosen on the basis of the suitability of the land and the soils, implemented on the basis of the cost effectiveness. So you're targeting 20% of your land area to address 80% of your discharges, and are 3 implemented in critical source areas. This is just one example, but there's numerous to show, and I think Lindsay showed a few today around riparian management. But this is in relation to grazing of crops. So you can see when you identify critical source areas, then you can establish a grazing program which reduces the contaminant discharges through those critical source areas. In this instance, cattle, they've been grazed away from a critical source area, which is this overland gully flow of water potentially, and then down to this. What that means is that they've retained a riparian buffer for as long as possible and generally trying to graze it when it's dry. In other instances I've seen, they've actually retired areas like this, or they don't put crops in them, they'll use other species, and they may farm sheep in those areas rather than heavier animals. Around riparian management, but this is in relation to. So farm environment planning is a critical component in allowing us to understand the natural resources of our farms and to address environmental concerns in a cost-effective manner. Importantly, farm environment plans capture stewardship and sustainability as a verifiable record, showing that measurable actions are being taken to address environmental concerns, and it underpins our social licence to operate going forward. So the public is increasingly demanding sustainable land and water quality activities, and the regulation is asking us to farm now within environmental limits which are clear, measurable, and are becoming enforceable. Farm environment planning provides a platform to improve our understanding of our natural resources, enhances farm profitability when it's well focused, and provides integrity to your unique story around your brand and your farming system. Ethical, humane, and sustainable produced food is likely to be a prerequisite to maintain our social licence to operate, and also may be part of underpinning our future markets. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Karina. We look forward to continuing to work with you and mine your knowledge in the future. Just like to change tack now to a slightly softer approach and introduce John Rodwell to you. John has spent his whole career in the agribusiness sector, but he's reinvented himself several times. Started out with New Zealand salmon. So he got into fish and then moved to Gisborne for a number of years and was in the vegetable processing, mainly tomato area. Then became an expert in eucalyptus forestry in Thailand for a number of years before he moved back to New Zealand. He and I are in partnership in a dairy farm actually in mid-Canterbury. Sorry, guys. But John's heavily involved in the deer and beef sector with the farm he co-owns at Terrace. So we're heavily involved in the Te Hono initiative together. John and Mavis Mullins will be known well to you from Maori Agribusiness, and Mavis puts an apology for not being here today. She's at the Ahu Whenua Awards up in Northland. John and Mavis have taken a real lead around initiative and a farmer-led initiative with a number of other people called the Waka Program. So I'll let John explain what it's about and how it might have relevance to the deer industry.
So good afternoon, everybody. Thanks, Andy, for the introduction. You're actually taking me back farther than I can remember. Andy's asked me to speak with the introduction on some particular interests and programs I'm involved with, and Andy's been involved with as well. It happens to be a very good follow-on from the presentation Karina has made. Karina's presentation has been accentuating the importance of good environmental stewardship from an industry body point of view, and I'm going to take you through that and some other issues effectively from a farmer point of view. So I'm going to actually do this in stages because, and bear with me, and some of what I say will be provocative, but I want it to be so. In our farming world, as we've all evolved, our view of our farm and our farm business has been largely farm-centric, within our farm boundary. We actually stock our country to suit us, to suit our land. We actually apply fertiliser to maximise production and to improve productivity. We actually apply chemicals to deal with insects and to deal with weeds, and we do that because it suits us and our farm system. We have a pretty average approach, and have done, to farm safety, and we are all aware of the spotlight that that's coming under now. And although we are naturally and within our DNA animal husbands and animal welfare is fundamental to our farming businesses, we've still got a long way to go. So we look at our farming business within the farm gate, and we have run our farm systems to suit our, effectively to suit our purposes. And that's fine, but it's being challenged now. Because, as Karina said, the rest of the country's looking at us as farmers. And this well-used phrase, I hope it doesn't become overused, but this well-used phrase, which is our social licence to operate, is not just a buzzword. It's real. And the way we run our farm businesses and the pressures we are under in running our farm businesses are all about continuing to have our social licence to continue to operate. So let's just have a recap of some of the points that Karina has said, which is how are we viewed by NZ Inc. as a farming community? Well, the Minister this morning has already outlined the fact that, rightly or wrongly, there is a very strong view that farmers are reckless and wasteful in the use of water, particularly in irrigation and dairying, and that's despite the fact, according to his statistics, that 98% of the water is not utilised and only 2% is used by society, of which only half of that is used by farming. Nevertheless, we have all seen the criticism that is levelled at supposed reckless use of irrigation. This manifests itself in exactly the same sorts of headlines as Karina put out, and we all see them every day and we hear them on the news. Discussed over cattle grazing at Coes Ford and the sensationalised and dramatic television footage and commentary which is associated with that. It's real. It's happening. We're being judged. Fertiliser application and the supposed reckless application of phosphate fertilisers across hill country and the consequential loss of up to 25% of all phosphate that's applied into rivers and waterways. We're being judged. And again, the use of chemicals and the use of chemicals within farming systems and the potential for residuals within the wider ecosystem is again something which is front and centre of society's judgment of farming today. And of course, health and safety. We've seen enough of this, these kinds of headlines, and we are, as managers, being judged according to our ability to create and maintain safe work practices and safe work environments for our staff. And finally, but probably most importantly, the sensationalisation of our animal welfare practices. And for everybody sitting here, and from what I've heard today, it seems almost incomprehensible that we would be judged as being poor managers of animals. But there are exceptions. And unfortunately, society looks at those exceptions. So we shift from inside the farm gate as to how we see ourselves to within New Zealand as to how we might be judged by society, to the wider world. What does the world think of New Zealand? What does the world think of our farming systems? What does the world care? So let's just go through that. Firstly, and probably very well illustrated today, an understanding of who our customer is. Because if we know who our customer is, then we actually know who cares. So our customer in the past has been connected by telephone at 6 o'clock on a Sunday evening, which is a processing company to try and get the best deal on a line of lambs or a line of cattle. That's not really our customer. And I think your industry has demonstrated that, in fact, your customer is in the market. Your customer is looking at you on the screen. And your farming business should be mindful of that customer, should be mindful of what they're thinking about, what inspires them, why will they consider buying your product. So being mindful of your customer is absolutely fundamental. And I think we're all beginning to understand that if we are mindful of our customer and we actually do change our farm practices to be mindful of our customer, then in actual fact there are markets and customers and parts of value which we're only just beginning to touch and understand. But we have to be cognizant of our customer. What do they care about? They care about authenticity of food. They want to make sure it's traceable. They want to make sure that it's transparently produced and of absolutely reputable quality. And they want to make sure that there's a quality assurance program that guarantees that. They care about the environment. They actually care about biodiversity. They actually care about chemical residuals that might be in the food they buy or the fibre they wear. They care about the reckless use of fertiliser and nutrient build-up. They care about that. And they seriously care about animal welfare. And of course, our unique opportunity in New Zealand to be leaders in grass-fed, GM-free, low-impact farming systems is absolutely fundamental. And of course, our adherence to the 5 basic freedoms for animal welfare are fundamentally important and becoming increasingly important to those customers, which I showed you a picture of earlier on. So that leads me to, what are we doing? So as Andy mentioned, we're all becoming more thoughtful about these issues. And I and Andy happen to be part of a group of, I would say thoughtful farmers, and probably no different to all of you here. Thoughtful farmers and linkers and thinkers and leaders who are contemplating a number of initiatives which will do things that shifts our mindset from within the farm gate to being cognizant of what society thinks we're doing and to be cognizant of what our customers want us to do. So we're thinking, firstly, let's have the conversation and face up to these things. And then secondly, what can we do? So we formed a group. It's called the Waka Aotearoa. It's a group of farmers, some small individual farmers, some large multi-ownership farms, company farms, and as Andy said, a lot of Maori farms and iwi corporations. And we've got together and started a conversation about these issues with a vision, which I'll read to you, of becoming an exemplar, leading transformational change within the New Zealand pastoral production to align consumer needs with future farming practices. Now let me just break that down from a bunch of words to simply say, how can we change on-farm practice to meet our consumer needs in New Zealand and our customer needs offshore? As I said, we're a bunch of farmers and others. And interestingly, the picture of the lady in the front of the picture is Vicky Robertson, who is the Chief Executive of the Minister of the Environment. So together with people who think and feel the same way, we formed a, if you like, a thinking group that's becoming an action group to do some things that we think will make a change. Within our group, there are 350 farms. And of those 350 farms, the governors and the managers are all absolutely of the view that we need to start to make these changes. And although these sound very aspirational goals, when you think about it, and when you think about your own farming systems, it's not hard to get 350 individual on-farm farm managers excited about doing the right thing. That's where we are. So, in terms of our connection, as Andy mentioned, this Waka Aotearoa group, and named as such for people who are prepared to come on board and paddle together in the same direction. This group is connected to an industry or an organisational group called Te Hono, and Te Hono may be known to some of you, but it's a group of industry, government, science and education leaders who've got together with a view of unlocking the power of New Zealand primary sector. It's a private sector-led, government-enabled partnership helping to shift our whole industry from volume to value. So, in practical terms, we're going to start little and try and work our way through some of these key things that we think are important. So what are we going to do? For a start, I'm going to talk to people like you with a view to changing the conversation. Create farmer-led change in philosophy and action. And as I said before, if we'd had this conversation 5 years ago, I think probably everybody's eyes would glaze over. The world's changed, and we've got to change. So we're starting the conversation about thinking outwardly from inside the farm gate to the wider society, and then internationally to our markets and customers, and thinking about the things we need to do on farm that will actually make a difference and extend and ensure our continued social license to operate. And particularly as I hear what I've heard today in your deer industry, do the things that inspire markets, inspire customers, make them choose your product, and create value well beyond what otherwise you might do. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create an environmental plan. Now this might sound as if it's a repetition of quite a lot of what Karina has said and you're all exposed to at the moment. But my issue from the farming businesses that I'm involved with is that there are all sorts of plans all over the place. So what we want to do is to create something that's simple and connects different farm systems and different geographies in a standard environmental plan. And it's not intended to replace or duplicate other plans which are in place, but it's intended to create a code of practice and a code of behaviour which makes all farm managers absolutely cognizant of their responsibility in terms of environmental planning, and through adherence to a plan will actually undertake and implement actions on farm which are of the highest standard. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to do the same in an animal welfare plan. And again, all of us, and your industry particularly, has been invited to, encouraged to, and sometimes enforced to adhere to some very strict environmental plans. But it comes as no surprise that this is fundamentally important to our customers and the markets that we work in. So again, within the Waka group of farmers, we are working out how to cobble together the best of the best. We're working with the vet industry, we're working with the SPCA, we're working with existing large-scale farming operations and trying to put together something which represents the best code of practice, which can be implemented across different farm systems and across different geographies, and particularly is able to be audited to provide that assurance in market. Now again, and really in conclusion, these initiatives are nothing magic and new, but the difference is that we think these initiatives should be generated by farmers to create a code of behaviour and practice that farmers think are at, shall I say, the optimal level. These are not imposed. These are farmer-led initiatives where they take the initiative to say these things are important for our farm, these things are important for our operation within the wider community, and these things are really important in the way we connect with our customers. We will take the lead. We will actually utilise and canvass the best of the best and put these into simple plans that we will adopt as 350 farms. And as we get traction and as we work these things through, we'll obviously be very interested and keen to share our findings and understandings with a wider group. So as Andy said, this is intended not to replace or replicate or duplicate, but this is a farmer-led initiative to actually put simple programs in place which we think will make a difference. So in finishing, let me just tell you, truth is the only option, and hyper-transparency is all around us. There's nowhere to hide. From now on, we have to be absolutely honest in our practice, and we have to be transparent. So with that, thank you very much indeed. And